Welcome to
our video series
on how to
research LIs.
I'm Derek.
And I'm Riley.
And don't forget, this video will take a deeper dive into the overall process of doing research. In our second video, we'll talk more about specific resources, rank them, and describe how we use them. Looking back to my first 2 days of medical school, a question I wished I asked myself before doing research in my first LI was, what is the point of doing research? When I started doing research, I was lost. I didn't know what resources to use, what information was important, or how to organize my understanding of a topic. I spent way too much time doing research, and I didn't have much to show for it. When I built my first handout and presentation, it felt disorganized and chaotic. And I didn't really feel like I had a good grasp on the material, and much of that had to do with the way I was approaching research. I felt like I needed to dive in incredibly deep into my LIs and become a complete expert at what I was studying. This is not the goal. Really, the goal with the research step is to build a framework for understanding your learning issue. And I would argue that this is perhaps the most important step of the LI process. Your research serves as the foundation for your understanding of a topic, and is ultimately the basis of your handout and presentation. In MD1, the framework you build for a topic should be relatively basic. You're just starting out. You aren't expected to be a master of anything. As the units go by, you'll revisit topics again, and with each pass, you'll have a deeper understanding. But for now, in MD1, keep your research basic. Keep it foundational. So, with all that in mind, we present to you our approach to research. And again, as a disclaimer, we are by no means experts. This is what has worked best for us. You need to do what works best for you. When we think about doing research for LIs, we think about digging. So, let's say this patch of ground here is all the information about cardiac physiology in the world. And somewhere down here in this big patch Earth are all the different resources you could use to build your foundation for this topic. And as you can see, each layer has different resources of different value. Some are much harder to get to than others. When we set off on placing down the first few blocks of our foundation, we ideally use resources in this first layer. I think of these as first pass resources. These are resources that are easy to understand and allow us to get a nice overview of a topic. As we spend time in this layer, our understanding of the topic grows, and we can start making our way down to those harder to get to resources and really begin to utilize them in our foundation. So let's say you're just starting out on researching heart physiology. We have all these different first pass resources to use, and we decided to use Osmosis, which is an excellent board review resource. A resource like Osmosis gives the very basics for your understanding of a topic. For example, they have a video on cardiovascular physiology. And in that video, they describe on a very, very basic level the different chambers and valves of the heart, its different layers, how its conduction system works, and how blood flows through it. Overall, it gives you an excellent primer on the topic. And now, with everything you learned in mind, it's now much easier to make your way down to the second pass resources and really dig into some of the previous topics you learned.
So continuing with our research topic of heart physiology, let's say we zone in on a physiology textbook, the Costanzo textbook. This textbook can often be really overwhelming, but as a second pass resource, it's really good. So let's say we pull out this figure as well as this section on circuitry of the heart, how blood flows through the different chambers and valves into the rest of the body. On a first pass, this would be extremely confusing. The percentages, the visual breakdown that we see in this figure, the explanations, this would be really hard to digest. But after watching that Osmosis video, now we can come to this section with a better understanding and really start to pull out these kind of deeper, more nuanced tidbits of information. And what's really awesome about using the second pass resource is now we can take this complicated information and present it to our group in a more digestible way. So they don't have to necessarily do the work of going through this difficult textbook and trying to figure out what is going on in these paragraphs. We're doing a lot of the legwork for them. And that's really the magic of PBL and making LIs, when you can do that for your group mates. When you first start researching a topic, A huge question is, what should I include? What are my boundaries? What is too much information? What is too little information? And this is a really challenging thing to get used to. All medical students still struggle with this at any level. This is a hard thing to be able to do. What's helpful, though, when we talk about boundaries is the idea of low yield versus high yield information. As a disclaimer, low versus high yield is not black and white by any means. We are wrong about what is high versus low yield all the time. Constantly, things that we think are low yield end up being not low yield on exams. It's super hard. The best we can do is try to include things that are a little bit more focused on the topic at hand and try to include less of things that are less focused on the topic. When we say low yield, we're not saying this information is not important. It is. Everything that we research is super important and it helps medicine as a whole. But things that we consider low yield generally are things that don't help us make LIs. These are often the complicated, very nitpicky pieces of information, like super long series of genes, really long biochemical pathways. These things don't help us very much. When we talk about high yield, this is information that gives us the best bang for our buck. This is information that's seen in a lot of first-pass resources and is paralleled in even second-pass resources. This is information that we can agree is kind of a whole that's really important for your understanding. Anything that's fairly basic and foundational is going to be high yield. Because if you don't know it, you're not going to understand this topic at all. So it's really important that we keep in mind what's high yield and what is low yield. When we move to this deeper level to start looking at second-pass resources, there really is this danger of sometimes falling into a rabbit hole where you just start spinning your wheels, where you're looking at really complicated resources that don't really give you a lot with regard to being able to teach or to be able to construct a really good LI. A paper, for example, on histone modifications might be super important for medicine as a whole, but for teaching you about a simple topic like an MI or basic heart physiology, it's probably not super helpful and it will probably just confuse you. You are a medical student. This is your first time really looking at these topics. So a really complicated research paper written for people who are researchers and doctors is probably not going to help you very much. When we stumble upon these resources when we're looking for gems, it's almost like falling into lava, and it can really derail the research process. So it's really important that you start with those first pass resources. You then move to your second pass resources, and you keep in mind the end goal, right? The end goal, building that foundation so you can make your LI and you can teach. Really keep that in mind. When you start to stray from that idea, caution yourself. Try to move back. Time management comes with practice, but it's a challenge. One tip, though, is stay focused. Use the first pass, second pass resources that helps you use your time more efficiently. And try to avoid those research rabbit holes where you just start spinning your wheels, looking at a lot of stuff, but not really learning a lot of information. Try your best to research, and just know that some topics don't have answers. And despite looking really, really hard, you might not be able to find a lot of information about certain topics. Another thing that can really help you better manage your time is not using too many resources. You could be using the right first pass and second pass resources, but using too many takes a lot of time. Try to use 3 or 4 main resources. And this comes with time, but it really makes a difference. There's no need to check 20 different resources when it's really just the same information from resource to resource. Really try to focus in on a few. More resources does not equal a better LI at all. The more resources you have, it often impairs the quality of your LI. To recap our process, start with those first pass resources, that first layer. Then move to the second pass resources to collect those gems. Then move on to making your handout, which we talk about in a future video. And check out our video on LI resources, where we go in depth into all these different resources so you know when to use certain resources and what are the best resources.